Picture this, it's 1921, and members of one Native American tribe are among the wealthiest people per capita in the entire world. The Osage Nation in Oklahoma is literally sitting on liquid gold, oil, and their members are driving Cadillacs, building mansions, and living lives that would make even the wealthy white elite jealous. But here's the terrifying twist that'll make your blood run cold. Someone is systematically murdering them, one by one, for their money and the people behind it. Some of them are sleeping in the same beds, eating at the same tables, and raising children with their victims. Welcome to one of America's most chilling serial killing sprees. A story so dark and twisted that it reads like a horror novel, except every single word of it actually happened. What I'm about to tell you is the true story of the Osage Reign of Terror, also known as the Osage Massacres, a calculated campaign of murder that lasted for years and claimed dozens of lives. It's a story that involves oil money, corrupt lawmen, hired killers, family betrayal, and a conspiracy so deep that it took the newly formed FBI to uncover the truth. But even they only scratched the surface of what really happened. Let me start by painting the picture of how the Osage Nation became incredibly wealthy, because understanding their riches is crucial to understanding why they became targets. In the late 1800s, the Osage people were forced from their ancestral lands in Kansas and relocated to what was considered worthless territory in northeastern Oklahoma. The government and white settlers thought they were dumping the Osage onto barren, useless land. They couldn't have been more wrong. Beneath that seemingly worthless Oklahoma soil lay vast reserves of oil. When oil was discovered in the early 1900s, the Osage had been smart enough to retain the mineral rights to their land. This meant that every time an oil company drilled on Osage territory, the tribe members received royalty payments. By the 1920s, these payments were making individual Osage families incredibly wealthy. We're talking about annual incomes that would equal millions of dollars in today's money. The Osage were driving the finest cars, wearing expensive clothes, building beautiful homes, and traveling the world. Newspapers called them the wealthiest people per capita on Earth. But this incredible wealth came with a deadly catch. They couldn't freely spend or manage their own money. The federal government had declared the Osage incompetent to handle their own finances and required that white guardians be appointed to manage their wealth. This racist system was supposedly for their protection, but it actually made them incredibly vulnerable to exploitation and murder. Here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Some people in the surrounding white communities weren't content to just be jealous of Osage wealth. They wanted to steal it, and they realized that there was a legal loophole that would allow them to inherit Osage oil money. If they married into Osage families, they could inherit their spouse's wealth when those spouses died. Even more sinister, if an entire Osage family died out, their oil rights could be transferred to white guardians or business partners. The killing began in earnest around 1921, though suspicious deaths had been occurring for several years before that. What made this different from typical murders was the systematic, calculated nature of the killings and how they specifically targeted wealthy Osage individuals and families. The perpetrators used every method imaginable: shootings, poisonings, bombings, and staged accidents. One of the most documented cases involved the family of Molly Burkhart, an Osage woman whose family became primary targets. Molly's sister Anna Brown was found shot in the head in a ravine in May 1921. A few months later, Molly's mother Lizzie died under mysterious circumstances that appeared to be poisoning. Then, in 1923, another sister, Rita Smith, was killed in a house explosion, along with her white husband and their housekeeper. The explosion was so powerful, it woke people up miles away. But Anna, Lizzie, and Rita weren't random victims. They were specifically chosen because their deaths would concentrate more oil wealth in the remaining family members, making the eventual inheritance even more valuable for those planning to claim it. The killers were playing a long game, systematically eliminating family members to consolidate wealth. The most chilling aspect of these murders was how often they were committed by people the victims trusted completely. Many Osage were killed by their own white husbands, their business partners, their appointed guardians, or people they considered friends. These weren't stranger killings. These were intimate betrayals by people who shared meals, beds, and daily life with their victims. Ernest Burkhart, Molly's white husband, was directly involved in the conspiracy to murder her family members. He had married into the family specifically to gain access to their oil wealth, and then participated in the systematic murder of his wife's relatives. Imagine the psychological horror of Molly's situation, watching her family members die, one by one, not knowing that her own husband was orchestrating their deaths. The local authorities were either incompetent or corrupt, and often both. Many local sheriffs, deputies, and officials were either directly involved in the conspiracy or were being paid to look the other way. Some were even participating in the murders themselves. The justice system that should have protected the Osage was instead working against them. When Osage families tried to investigate the deaths of their loved ones, hire private detectives, those investigators often ended up dead too. The conspiracy had tentacles everywhere, and anyone who got too close to the truth was eliminated. This created a climate of absolute terror in the Osage community. They knew they were being systematically murdered, but they had no idea who they could trust or where they could turn for help. The scope of the killing was much broader than most people realize. While the FBI investigation ultimately focused on the Burkhardt family murders, historians estimate that over 60 Osage people were murdered during this period, and possibly many more. Some researchers believe the actual number could be over 100, as many deaths that appeared natural or accidental were likely murders that were never properly investigated. The methods used were often sophisticated and designed to avoid suspicion. Poisoning was extremely common because it could mimic natural illness. Victims would gradually become sick and die, and local doctors, some of whom were part of the conspiracy, would attribute the deaths to natural causes. Insulin was frequently used as a murder weapon because it was hard to detect and could cause symptoms that looked like diabetes complications. When poisoning wasn't used, the killers often staged elaborate accidents or used methods that would destroy evidence. The house explosion that killed Rita Smith was so powerful that it left a crater and scattered debris for hundreds of yards. Car accidents, shootings made to look like robberies, and other staged scenarios were common. The breakthrough in solving these crimes came when the Osage Nation directly petitioned the federal government for help. They had lost faith in local law enforcement and knew that only federal intervention could stop the killing. This request reached the desk of J. Edgar Hoover, who was then the young director of the newly formed Bureau of Investigation, which would later become the FBI. Hoover assigned the case to Tom White, an experienced investigator who assembled a team of agents to infiltrate the conspiracy. What they uncovered was shocking, even to seasoned federal investigators. A vast network of corruption involving local businessmen, law enforcement, government officials, and prominent community members. The investigation revealed that the mastermind behind many of the murders was William Hale, a respected local rancher and businessman who was known as the King of the Osage Hills. Hale had cultivated a public image as a friend to the Osage people, but in reality, he was orchestrating their systematic murder. He had convinced his nephew Ernest Burkhardt to marry Molly specifically to gain access to her family's oil wealth, and then directed the murders of her family members. Hale's operation was sophisticated and far-reaching. He had corrupt law enforcement officers on his payroll, hired killers who carried out the actual murders, and a network of accomplices who helped cover up the crimes. He was also involved in insurance fraud, land schemes, and other criminal enterprises that preyed on the Osage community. The FBI's investigation took years and required them to essentially rebuild the case from scratch, since local law enforcement had either ignored or actively destroyed evidence. They had to overcome witness intimidation, corruption, and a conspiracy of silence that had protected the killers for years. When the case finally went to trial, the evidence revealed the shocking extent of the conspiracy. Ernest Burkhardt eventually confessed to his role in the murders, implicating his uncle William Hale and numerous other conspirators. The trials exposed how the Guardian system had been systematically abused, how local officials had been corrupted, and how an entire community had participated in or ignored the systematic murder of their Osage neighbors. However, even the successful prosecution of Hale, Burkhardt, and some of their accomplices only represented the tip of the iceberg. Many other perpetrators were never brought to justice, and countless murders were never properly investigated or solved. The FBI's investigation, while groundbreaking, was limited in scope and couldn't address the full extent of the systematic killing. The psychological impact on the Osage community was devastating and long-lasting. Survivors lived in constant fear, never knowing who they could trust. Families were torn apart, not just by the murders themselves, but by the discovery that trusted family members had been involved in the killings. The trauma rippled through generations, affecting children and grandchildren who grew up hearing stories about this reign of terror. The economic impact was also significant. While the oil wealth continued to flow, the constant threat of murder and the corrupt Guardian system meant that much of the wealth was siphoned off by white guardians and business partners. Many Osage families lost not just their loved ones, but also significant portions of their financial inheritance to the very people who were supposed to be protecting their interests. The Osage Reign of Terror represents one of the most systematic and prolonged campaigns of murder in American history. It wasn't just a series of random crimes. It was a calculated conspiracy to steal an entire nation's wealth through murder and fraud. The fact that it was carried out primarily by white people against Native Americans, often with the cooperation or complicity of local and state authorities, makes it a particularly dark chapter in the history of American racism and colonialism. Today, the Osage Reign of Terror serves as a stark reminder of how greed, racism, and systemic corruption can combine to create unimaginable evil. The story has gained renewed attention in recent years, particularly after the publication of David Grant's book, Killers of the Flower Moon, and its adaptation into a major motion picture by Martin Scorsese. But beyond its value as historical education, this story remains relevant because many of the underlying issues it exposes, systemic racism, economic exploitation of indigenous communities, corruption in law enforcement and government, and the vulnerability of marginalized groups to violence, continue to exist in various forms today. The legacy of the Osage Reign of Terror continues to affect the Osage Nation and serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of justice, the dangers of unchecked greed and power, and the resilience of communities that survive unimaginable trauma.